Okay, hello and welcome everyone. I'm Jason Gumpert from msdynamicsworld.com, and thanks for joining us for today's event, the first session in our Fall 2015 CRM webcast series. Today we're joined by David Green and John Long of MTech to look at the topic of user adoption and organizational change management as it relates to CRM in general and Dynamic CRM in particular. David and John bring a lot of real-world experience and expertise to this topic. We're really glad to have them joining us as first-time presenters for MS Dynamics World. I also want to just recognize our CRM event series sponsor, Scribe Software, and thank them for their support. And to get this event started, please know that we do invite you in the audience to add your feedback and ask questions today. You can use the Q&A block that you should see to the right of the slides to ask your questions anytime. The speakers, John and David, will be making time to answer those at the end. So without further delay, let me hand things off to John. John, are you there?
I am here, and I'd like to say happy football season, everyone. This is always an enjoyable part because my team is tied for first going into week one. I want to quickly just introduce MTech. Dave and I both work for MTech, which is a provider of technology-empowered business solutions that try to move your organization towards greater insights, smarter decision-making, which is kind of where this series came out of. We totally firmly are committed to organizational change management, and as you'll see, it can have a great impact on how your users perceive and adopt your CRM solution. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about key challenges, the need for an OCM methodology, talk about where it fits in getting the business ready, talk about requirements, tool selection. You're going to see kind of OCM trickle down through all of these previous rooted advisory services that most organizations do have. So we're going to try to shed a light on how, looking at organizational change management, how that can shape your advisory services to be just a little bit more thorough and, come up with that end result. And then we'll talk about the implementation with the alignment and the whole user adoption focus with OCM as a primary focus. So key challenges in business today, this all comes out of the fact that we still have much of the, many of the same challenges we've had for the last 5-6 years in CRM. And now with the introduction of mobility, compliance, and all this social aspect, businesses have to do something different to be able to, ensure that their solutions are going to be designed well and used well from the community. So this slide kind of talks about where we feel the focus has gone from the beginning stages. So in the early CRM days, I'll call it, companies use spreadsheets and databases. I mean, it was CRM as a methodology, really not a tool. So this kind of shows that, companies started just getting involved with basically Lotus Excel or Microsoft Excel and Lotus 1-2-3 way back in the day. All these spreadsheet packages, kind of drove organizations, and they started putting together processes based upon this reporting stream and data stream they had. Then CRM tools started to come along because we needed more relational information. And the early tools were really terrible. They were very hard to use, and it almost required you to partner with somebody to do the services for you because the tools, when you installed them, were just blank and needed a high degree of customization. And as the tools started to mature, so did the thought that, wow, now we've got a good tool base, but we need to be able to make sure they meet the needs of the users, and that's where business process management came in and business process mapping. It's like we need to take our organization, we need to gather the requirements, and then we need to customize CRM to be able to deliver on those requirements. And that's kind of where we've been the last 2 or 3 years. We've been in a spot where, that it's been successful, and we've been, making a lot of headway, and CRM solutions were much more robust, very much targeted towards functional groups. But still, we were, looking back and not getting the companies to adopt them. And that's kind of where the new wave now is. We've moved to a place where we think you need to get the entire organizational change impact considered. So even though, let's say you're going to roll out sales pipeline management to your sales team, you still have to see what the impact is going to be to the overall organizations, to the operations and service side, so that everybody is aware of what's going on and can support the effort and really get our organization and the users to adopt. So that's kind of the primary focus. So why is it important? Where does it help? So organizational change management is the process of planning and implementing a change in such a way that to minimize the employee resistance and costs, and then maximizing the effort. I mean, that is a perfect statement to say what it is. There's a lot of different methods and approaches and disciplines in order to act on it. But, you know, a couple bullets that are noteworthy is 70% of IT projects fail to meet results due to organizational resistance. And, you know, this happens time and time again in CRM deployments. You know, you go out there, you deploy it, you've got a great tool, you've got, you know, a great team using it, but the organization, you know, it just starts falling off, you know, kind of like a newsletter. The first 30 to 60 days, everybody's on board. It's the most amazing thing. And then people are scrambling to come up with content and find a way to why we need to be using it and why we need to be sending it out. And we've also, there's a strong correlation, McKinsey and Company survey said there's a strong correlation between a project's ability to meet the ROI objectives and the effectiveness of the project's OCM effort. So what we'd like to do right now to go into the next slides is put up a quick poll for you. We're just wondering what type of OCM involvement you, as our audience, have had in the past. And Dave, you want to further maybe explain the poll to them?
I think.
Jason, you got the poll up?
Oh. The poll is up now. If you wanted to say anything else about it, feel free, but it's up and people are participating. We'll give them about another 10 seconds here, and then we'll close it out.
And what we're looking for in this poll is really your participation, whether direct or indirect, in projects that utilized organizational change management, whether that was you being involved on an OCM team, you observing OCM. We just want to know your level of familiarity with organizational change management.
And it's going to be a few more seconds before the results show up, but I can tell you the distribution is, have you been involved? 32% have said yes, 23% have said no, and then about 20% have said not sure. I can post that for you here.
Okay, that's valid.
Okay.
Awesome, thank you for that. Yeah, and hopefully by the end of the presentation, we can turn the not sures into seeing if you followed any of these disciplines or have had any of this impact in your projects in the past. Because it's something I think just like CRM went on and it didn't have a name, you know, because it really is a strategy. And since organizational change management is really an approach and a methodology, you could have experienced various pieces and just not aware of it. So, you know, I thought this was real relevant. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and, you know, looking at businesses' challenges of today, you would think that these posts were made 5 years ago, you know, but even today, you know, CRM Experts is just one of the many groups that I follow. It's got over 90,000 members, and there's really good content every day on here. And, you know, it's some of the questions you can see: how to get your employees to use CRM. What's the value to an individual person? Do you think it's one size fits all? You know, what are 3 advices for adopting a new CRM software company? So the question of user adoption is still very relevant today. Companies are putting it in, they're getting good results probably from the user group, but then it just fades off and users fail to continue to use it. And that's due to many factors, but we personally feel that to go back and really get the organization kind of involved in the project from the beginning is really the way to kind of get more predictive adoption results in the end. So this is just a few. I'm not going to read through this list, but I'm sure you can shake your head when you talk about you know, some CRM projects, you know, that go awry. And we think that without having an OCM first approach, these are the things that almost always, you know, one, if not all of them, always end up impacting the project, with poor user adoption or little to no realization of business value being the main concern for the business. So we see the whole services of a CRM implementation being 5 phases. And, you know, it's the top part is like, where is your company? Because the news is no matter where you are in this journey, you can always jump in, you can go back, and then keep going around. Because, as you know, CRM is very much a continuous improvement process. and it never stops. So we see the initial phase being the business readiness scoping phase, and then after you do the business readiness, which is really where OCM really puts its roots in, and then you need to validate the need and business requirements. Still a very critical piece. And then you have your software selection. The biggest issue that we see is a lot of people start there. When we get called into, a customer's need or RFP, it's like they want to choose their piece of software first before they go through the other phases. And that's just always a bad idea. But once you go through and get the business ready and you have your requirements, then you can effectively select the tool, and then you can go into the implementation phase, and then the user adoption and the health. The assessment of the business, and kind of keep the process repeating in a continuous improvement process. So business readiness for OCM for CRM, this is really where the beginning of our journey starts. And Dave is going to now take you through the initial methodology of how to get the business ready and engage with OCM.
So thanks, John. So go to the next slide if you wouldn't mind, and I'll start you off with the CRM vision. So one of the themes that John has mentioned a couple of times is user adoption, and I'm going to continue to focus on user adoption. It's kind of one of the key successful outcomes of a good OCM program, CRM. A critical first step is actually the CRM vision. So starting with a clearly articulated vision is a critical first step, because a lot of times the user community doesn't know why CRM is being implemented. They don't know why it impacts them, and they feel things are going along just fine, so why do we really need to change? So getting people on board with the, with the same vision, same approach, and it starts really with executive stakeholders. Getting executive stakeholders to align to a vision, having them help to cascade that message to their functional business units, and then really continuing with that message throughout the design and the build and deployment of a CRM program is important to keeping everybody aligned, and also increases user adoption. Not to mention, when it comes time for requirements gathering, you want those requirements aligned to a common goal, and this CRM vision is that common goal. So really starting with the CRM vision is a critical first step. If you go to the next slide, so basically to get that started and to unlock user adoption, you really need a governance structure to make that happen. And what is so what's the governance structure? Most programs, of course, have a program management office. So that's project management, and they run the project accordingly. Where a lot of programs fail is they don't have organizational change management kind of tied to the hip with project management. So setting up this governance infrastructure, I like to call it, is really an important step to making sure that as you identify business stakeholders and you're involving them throughout the program, this is a governance model that puts structure behind that so that you're doing it the right way. So if you go to the next, so really what that means is the PMO should have a project manager and a change manager kind of tied to the hip, and they're running the program collectively. So what would a successful or effective governance structure look like? So this slide is kind of one generic view of it. So on the left-hand side, you have your project. You have your project leadership. You have all the various aspects of a project, whether it's process and design team, your security team, controls, et cetera. And you'll see OCM is in there as well. And then on the right-hand side, you see all the different business functions that are impacted by this change. And for each business function that's impacted, identifying a change agent that is really the liaison between the business and the project. And those change agents form a change agent network. And again, this is a formal, structured group of people that the project interacts with every single week to make sure it's a two-way form of communication, to make sure that the project is communicating to the business what's coming, how people are impacted. And it also helps the project be successful by gaining critical information from the business, like identifying users that have to participate in testing, identifying users that have to validate data, identifying who needs to be trained, identifying role mapping and who needs access to what security functions within CRM. So this, this change agent network is a critical step towards really combining and getting the business involved throughout. There's a couple of key roles involved here. So the OCM team plays a liaison function between the project and the business. So every single week they're facilitating a meeting with these change agents, and they're doing the right things to make sure the business is involved. There's a business implementation manager role that's also very important. This is a senior business stakeholder that has a lot of respect within the organization, and this is the person that's going to make the change agents do what they need to do for the project to be successful. So a lot of times when you engage on a project, you have consultants that are performing the organizational change management function, and as a consultant, it's very difficult to demand that these change agents do what they need to do. So it really is facilitated by the consultants within an OCM team, but the one who's giving direction, following up, making sure people are performing the activities that they've been requested to perform, that's your business implementation manager. And again, that's a senior business stakeholder that has the clout and the respect to make that happen. So, those are some of the elements of the infrastructure behind the governance that's necessary for a successful CRM program and to achieve user adoption.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that, the scary part about this is that often even the project management is cut from CRM projects. When I know as a solution provider, it's sometimes very difficult to get customers that are on limited budgets to see the value of project management. Well, now you can see the added value of the business side being focused on. So I think in smaller projects, you can get away with a lower scale approach, which you have to have, because you can never do it without project management. You've got to at least have solution deployment specialists that have skills in being able to manage the project. But, you can kind of see side by side on the slide, which is why it's put together this way, is there is a business function to project management, to be able to get the organization involved. So hopefully that helps clear it up, and we've got other slides to kind of support that.
Okay, I think
so
I'm handing it back to John.
You bet. So now that we've, initially, now we have the project, the business requirements, or the business evaluated. You got the project team, you got the business team, you got them working together with the roles. We've created a vision for what we're trying to accomplish. Now you can get into the business requirements where you're going to validate the need for the system. And this is where, most deployments or CRM projects actually start. So all the material that we just presented ahead of time is really where we're saying that you need to start if you want predictable results. So in the second advisory service here, this is the business requirements. This is where you're going to review everything at a very high level, create your requirements, your functional requirements, review the business processes that support them, and if you can, you want to document them. Again, that's kind of like project management. It's one of those things that's kind of pushed off to the side, saying, we've got a limited budget, we want to get right in and do it. But hopefully over the course of this, you're going to understand that there is a right way to go about this, and you just do need to follow it. It doesn't mean that you have to go in depth and exhaust into all the areas, but you have to have all the components to have a successful project. So, in the business requirements, you really need to follow these, 6 methodology steps. And you can use various methodologies, but these components need to be in there so that you can identify, you can understand the complexity, and you can capture it at a high level. Almost every CRM project that I've done, you have future release items. You gather the information now, but you never want to implement everything you gather in the beginning, because once the users start using the system, they're going to change their minds on how they answer the questions the first time around, and we know that just from experience. So we try to get everything at a very high level, carve out the piece that's going to have the highest impact and value initially, and then start that continuous improvement process cycle. And this just further, defines that, remember, CRM is a strategy. It's not a tool. You don't buy CRM. You implement a CRM strategy. And Gartner is very big in coming out saying, you need to focus on the business strategy and your business requirements first. And then you're able to move it forward with the collaboration of people, process, and technology. That's been CRM 101 from, 8 years ago, people, process, and technology. But a lot of people jump forward and just get right into the solution and designing it with the users instead of understanding what the strategy and what the business is really trying to accomplish in the first place. So what is the right approach? In doing the requirements, you want to, you really need to review all the relevant business documents. You get people assembled together. I mean, you actually lead groups through as is and a future state session. Now, I've also seen people avoid the as is. That is one of the areas that if you did need to cut costs, you don't really have to talk about how you've been doing it if you've got a really clear vision on what you want to do. The value in that is it really helps you understand the complexity of moving from point A to point B. So if you go through and say, here's how we're doing it today, and it's challenging because people keep wanting to throw in how they want to do it, but it's like, how are you doing? How does the process work today? And then you go through the sessions and document the future state. Now you have your gap. Here's where we're doing it. Here's what we want to do. How do we move that forward? And why is this so important? Because you want to get all the users of all the devices, of all the processes involved in this exercise, because it's the only way to ensure you're adequately addressing the organization. And as you can see, the change to the organization is going to be far greater than the functional group you're targeting for the solution. So this is just, I'm sure you have your own methodologies you follow as far as requirements gathering and going through, but this is really kind of the repetitive process that you do. You go in for the high-level business processes, you then get the requirements down, you get the functional requirements, you talk about high-level integration requirements. That's very important. Integrations will complicate a CRM project far faster than anything else you can do. So you really need to understand what are the current business systems that we use and operate with that we may potentially want to integrate with. Since it's a continuous change improvement process, you may not understand some integrations that you might want to have, but it's good to talk about them so you can kind of put them out there on the list and start addressing them later as you start addressing those needs, because you can certainly, fill data, populate seed data. It's really all about finding the authoritative source for data. It's like, where does your customer information start and live and get updated? Where does your, financial information go? And identifying all those systems will give you high-level integration requirements. And then you basically identify them, you document each, you get the processes down, and you continue until you've got all the processes that are going to be impacting for your CRM deployment. And the deliverables, you have a baseline operations review, you have a prioritized list of capabilities. That capability maturity level is very important in understanding and taking those requirements and putting them into a matrix so you understand where you're at along the journey. So not only do you have the requirement, but where is your maturity level in that requirement? Have we just started? Have we implemented it and we're really good at it? Is the system using that information to continue improvement or not? And then you have basically your operating blueprint and CRM roadmap that comes out of it. So again, very important to make sure you go through and document. That's very key. Oops, go back here. So here is a sample the process map. I mean, you can map in a variety of different ways, but this is just a sample of where you take, using a swim lane approach, where you take your different departments and you show at a very high level how the processes impact each other and how it flows and the data flows through your organization. In this example, you can see all your data sources and reporting and forms are all at the bottom. All your boxes are up in the middle in the swim lanes, and you're identifying the process, and then you're showing what systems and what documents are affected by the process. This is very critical to business process mapping for CRM projects, because this is when the business challenges, why do we need to do that? You can look at a box and see, here's the process, here's the systems it uses, and here's all the documents affected. So if you want to go change a form, for instance, you can now go to your process map and see what processes will changing this form affect across the board. So, and this is where the change impacts are all identified.
Right. So if you do this approach the right way, you have had business involved in coming up with the future process designs. And while you go through that facilitation technique in coming up with the future process, a technique used called the change impact analysis is used in these design sessions. And really what that means is you look at, and there's a form that lays out how this future process is going to impact each of the roles affected. So on the left-hand side in the swim lane, not only do you have systems and functions, but you should also have business roles. So if it's a sales manager versus a sales representative versus back-end sales rep, et cetera, you have which role is going to basically perform each of the steps of the process. And then as that process is being designed, if there's a step in there that is different than today, the business stakeholders that are currently performing that process speak up and they say, you know, yes, how is that going to change your role as a sales manager? And then you get into a dialogue and you fill out certain data that captures how that role is going to change. At the end of the process, you have a very good inventory of your change impacts, and that really helps you better assess the level of complexity and the scope of your change effort. And if you go to the next slide, John, you'll see that capturing this in a high-level change impact presentation is one of the first steps. So you combine all of those change impacts. A lot of times they overlap and they are basically the same change impacts across the board. So you summarize that and you try and figure out at a high level what are the major change drivers of the program and which specific role is impacted and how are they impacted. So that's step number one in the change impact. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see that with that information, now you really have a good baseline understanding of the scope of organizational change management. So now that you know how things are changing and who's changing, you can look at the organizational scope of the program, the change complexity of the program, the political resistance areas, the cultural challenges, and the change capability, which is how well the organization manages change efforts. And all of this is an assessment that we do that helps us understand specifically how to scope the level of effort for an organizational change management component of the project. And on the next slide, you can see that the output is, we have inputs are the change vision, the change level impacts, and the change complexity assessment we just talked about. The outputs are, what are the major components of OCM that we need on this project? As John mentioned earlier, some projects are very limited in scope, and you may only need a small level of stakeholder management, et cetera. So some are very thin. Others are very robust as far as the change effort. So that's what this exercise is all about, is identifying how to effectively deal with that change. And that leads into the next slide, which is our OCM roadmap. So you take each one of those elements and you say, if it's communications, and we know the stakeholder groups that are impacted, we know the duration of the project roughly, then you can start to lay out kind of the major elements of each organizational change management component. So what do we have to do relative to communications, to organizational alignment, to the business implementation network or the change network, et cetera, et cetera. And the roadmap ideally, right, leads right into how big of a team do you need for OCM, what kind of budget should be considered for OCM. And it's important to do this up front because many times the program does not go through this exercise. They don't understand the complexity. The budget's already set, and then it's too late to establish the appropriate OCM team because the budget has been locked down. So doing this in this particular phase of the project is hopefully early enough to influence the budget for OCM. And those numbers that John shared earlier as far as the relationship between an OCM program and ROI are tied to OCM budget. So those numbers were derived by saying for projects that took on OCM and had a certain level of budget dedicated to OCM, let's track the return. And the return on what they considered a robust OCM program, the average was 143%, compared to, I think, something like 30% for those that did not engage in this kind of an approach. So there's definitely financial benefit tied to going through this kind of a methodology.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you.
I think I'm handing it back over to you, John.
Yeah, and so, so now that we've gone through those phases, now is a, time to select your CRM software, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but the idea is that software selection, this is the time. So when you've gone through the organization preparedness and the business readiness, and then you've gone through the requirement sessions and the requirements mapping, now you have the items that you need to meet the needs of for any software tool that you might select. So rather than trying to go out and pick a tool that's most robust and, and it just does the latest and greatest, it's like we really need to pick a tool and one that is that has a good price point to be able to meet the needs of the business and meet the needs of the functional groups that we're designing it for. So this is nothing more than to talk about that, even software selection has a framework, right? I mean, you don't just go in there, get the vendors to come in and do a dog and pony show and then pick the best one. I mean, there is a framework that you should at least adhere to, just like with business requirements, just like with OCM. Software selection has a framework that you can go through to be able to understand and get your selection criteria and metrics developed and how you're going to evaluate those criteria. Often if that's left out, it just becomes a popularity contest, and it really doesn't help the organization pick the tool and the solution that's best for the organization. And with a high level of customization that is done on these products, I think it's even more important to have your business requirements ready and the organizational, the capabilities that you need to meet so that you can define those metrics and selection criteria prior to getting into any negotiations with any tool that's out there. So benefits and realization, the ability to establish financial justification for CRM, because this is really where it comes down to. If you take the steps that Dave suggested for organizational change management, you've already created a vision and got buy-in from a team that never existed before. So now when you get to this case and you have to realize the benefits, the business case now is leveraged in communicating the value of the program. That is just key. And Dave, this is kind of where OCM budget planning gets involved as well, correct?
Yeah, there's a couple of really important benefits to doing this at this particular point in the program and doing it right. So as John mentioned, one thing is to make sure that when you do the business case, you are incorporating the right level of OCM. We went through the approach earlier on the OCM roadmap that established kind of the right level of effort, the right team structure that has a cost to it, and that cost should be integrated into the business case, right? So the cost of the program. The other piece is doing this right and getting into the right level of detail is leveraged in a significant way in communication. So as you're communicating to the various roles impacted by the program, you need to tell them what's in it for them and what's in it for the organization. And it should really all be tied back down to benefits. So why are we using a CRM program? What's it going to do to the benefits for a sales manager? How is it going to improve their top line sales? How is it going to improve their profitability? So the business case provides the content, right, to help to convince all the different stakeholders of what's in it for them and the financial drivers to that. So it's a critical step here.
Yeah, and Dave, we just had a question come in that I think is kind of appropriate for this time slot, so I'm going to just kind of address it right now. The question was, do you feel partners leave OCM out when presenting an offering just to keep the cost down and have a more appealing offer? And so my initial response to that is I believe that a lot of partners don't understand OCM and its value and may not even have an offering, to present, from an experience point of view. I mean, I think partners have a hard enough time justifying project management, let alone if they had an OCM practice and the ability to do it. But certainly, I think it's one of I think project management and organizational change management are two things that companies would be quick to lop off. But I certainly personally don't believe partners should leave it out, just like we're presenting it today. We are blending OCM into our offerings because we feel that, how important it is to the overall success of the project. And just like project management, you can have a variety of levels. You don't have to go full-blown, you know, I think there's key deliverables that you have to have and discussions that you have to make. And as long as you feel you can move forward and that you've accomplished the business readiness side of it, you can effectively move on without dramatically increasing the cost of the project. And as Dave just mentioned, without doing it, your ROI is going to probably fall below expectations. So it's more of a cost avoidance than a cost savings, because you really are going to save money on the project if you bring it in. Dave, any other comments on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and if I look back to somewhat the chronology of OCM, I've been doing this for 20+ years. Back in the early days, organizational change management, it was a real struggle to not only get this to be a formal part of the business case, but to have organizations realize the benefit of it. Those were the early days of CRM and other IT platforms and solutions. As time goes on and the maturity of these programs have gone up, there's been the realization of this user adoption issue. I think that in the last probably 2 to 3 years, it's been that recent, there's been a significant increase in the acknowledgement that you need an OCM type approach. I agree with John that a lot of organizations don't really understand OCM, but what they do understand is user adoption is a key issue. Lots of organizations don't get the user adoption that they want, and that they should do something about it. So if you present OCM in the right way up front, I think you'll have a receptive audience. At least, these days it's becoming a lot better.
Great, thanks for the question. So it takes us to the implementation. So now the business is aligned. So now, in the phases of services for a CRM implementation, now comes the implementation. And you can see it's well positioned after the business readiness, the requirements, and now the software selection. And if your implementation, this really follows kind of a project management model. If you get your preparation done up front, the implementation is not the most complex piece of the puzzle. The harder part is getting all the other information up to it, because if you've got your vision, you've got your capabilities identified and mapped, you've got your requirements mapped, your processes mapped, the design now is done after the requirements. It's fairly easy to implement and train users, because now you've got a very well-designed system and you've got documentation to support it already going into the training sessions. So the big star here is on the prepare the business, because the top 5 methodology steps are pretty common to any implementation strategy in the world. You have analysis, design, develop, deploy, operate, train, and then you just continue to continue that cycle and start over and keep going through it. The big piece is engage the business, communicate, you manage the stakeholders, prepare the business for the change, and then you can train and transfer knowledge. That is the real star of the show for implementation, is business, 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 because everybody's good at functional focus. I mean, I can take a group of salespeople and give them a good CRM solution. I can take a service organization and give them a solution. That's not the problem anymore. It's the other piece of making sure you engage the business, because if everybody isn't involved in this and understanding the impact and understanding what's going on, it quickly will fall off the charts. As you saw from my CRM experts list, I mean, every day those questions still keep coming up, and you basically shake your head thinking, how can we be still having these problems after several years of implementing these great tools that just continue to get better? It's not about the tool, it's not about the design, it's about the business preparation and communication. And this is just kind of a snapshot out of Microsoft SureStep methodology approach. It's a very good one. It's not, it doesn't mean you have to do everything the way it is. In fact, a challenge is to try to pass their test on this, because they don't tend to, you have to know their answers to when you would do things, not the real business way you would approach it. But, you think about it, it's a great guideline, because no one process is going to be consistent across all businesses in the world. So from a global starting point, I think this is a fantastic process, and it really, I mean, if you haven't used it before, certainly, download it, because it's free, and somebody's put a lot of time and money into developing templates, documentation, processes, and I think there's some really good takeaways. the biggest takeaway is you must have a methodology when you go to deploy. You can't just randomly do it. If you don't have one, start with this one and then put your company into it, because they do let you modify the documents, put your logo out there and make it yours. But very good. I just want to leverage it because, you know, utilizing a best practice with an OCM engagement model, that's really where, you know, this thing all ties together and you get the success that you were striving for. So as far as what you implement, I kind of mentioned this earlier, you know, you'd want to go for core functionality first. You can see from here, you know, the center of this is accounts, contacts, activity, and your business processes. That is a must. So with every CRM solution, you stand those up. Now, where do you go next? You know, I suggest you go one area. You don't tackle this all at once because you can see the full capability of what a CRM solution can do. And once you get into extended CRM or XRM, it's limitless. So you got to start somewhere. And what I'm telling you is when you talk to your users and try to get them to tell you what they want, until they use a CRM system, they aren't going to be able to answer all your questions. So get the high-level basis down, implement core functionality in maybe one sales process. Once they use it, 3 months down the road, you can go back and then start getting release 2, release 3, and make CRM that continuous improvement process that it really is. And so you need to focus on core, build it, you know, customer-centric business process, and then expand to the other services that CRM offers. And this is really where it kind of accentuates. This is a continuous improvement process. You start out with core CRM, and then you already plan, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, highlight those business requirements across the board. Get the high-level ones, but put them off to future phases. The reason you do that is twofold. The first is you want to focus on core first, a quicker, lower-cost, speedy implementation to get people up and using it and adding value right away. And the second thing is you're showing them that you heard them. It's like, hey, here's all the things we're going to do in release 2 and 3. So when they get release 1, they don't think you didn't hear them, you didn't get everything they wanted. It's like, no, we've got that. We're just earmarking it for future releases. Very important, you know, for the CRM adoption. And so up until this point, we've talked a whole lot about, you know, OCM and you know, kind of blended it together, which it really is. You blend it into the process. But now I'm going to kind of turn it over to Dave to kind of summarize and give you the key takeaways from the OCM.
Right. So earlier on, we talked about an OCM roadmap, and there's a correlation between the scope and complexity of changes and what kind of OCM program you need. So John, if you could just flip to the next slide. So OCM could consist of a very comprehensive program where there's lots involved, and it could consist of a limited OCM involvement. It just depends on the scope of the program. But I thought it would be useful to stress what I think are really the 4 core elements. No matter the scope or complexity of a CRM program, I think these 4 core elements are needed in every program. So it starts with the top left, that's the business engagement and stakeholder management approach we talked about. You have to have an infrastructure to enable the governance to occur between the project and the business, as we discussed earlier. So that is a critical, necessary step. The communication effort involved, whether it's a small group of people impacted or a large, you know, multinational company, communications is always key in a program. And there are really 4, we haven't talked much about communications, but during the implementation phase, which we're talking about now, there are really 4 major communication campaigns that are required in a program. The first is an awareness campaign. So putting together the materials and making sure everybody understands those visionary statements we talked about earlier. What's the program about? What is it trying to achieve? What's the scope of the program? What's the timeline? Making sure everybody's aware of what's coming their way. And then the second one is an understanding phase. So when the future processes have been designed and we understand those high-level change impacts, we start to communicate that to all of the constituents that will be affected by the change. So they can start to see how the sales process, for example, might be changing. And this invokes a lot of, sometimes a lot of concern, always a lot of questions. And the whole idea is to get those questions surfaced early so you can address them, answer them, and that will minimize the resistance. If you don't have people asking challenging questions up front, and all of a sudden they go through training and they have to use this tool without getting those questions answered, that's when you get resistance. So laying out an early understanding phase is important. And then the buy-in is really how is it going to impact each person in each role. So that's where it gets very specific to each individual. So there's a whole communication campaign around articulating what the change is by business role. And then the last communication campaign is all the pre-go live communications around training, around cutover, all the things that are going to happen in preparation to go live, et cetera. So it's more logistics and getting people ready for the go live event. So that's the communication. That should be happening on every program. On the bottom left is one of the tools that I described in the buy-in campaign. And this is something called a Start, Stop, Continue guide. And again, we talked earlier about the swim lanes and the process flow, and those swim lanes illustrate each business role. So what this Start, Stop, Continue guide does is for each business role, we say, what are the activities you're going to start doing in the future that you were not doing before? What activities were you doing that you're going to stop doing? And what activities are you going to continue to do? So this really makes it personal. And as a sales manager or back-end sales support person, I can see how this CRM platform is going to change my life on a daily basis. It's a very important communication mechanism, and I recommend it on every program. And then finally, this business readiness dashboard. So this is a compilation of all the things that the OCM team has identified while working with those change agents to identify what does the business need to be ready for this change. You compile those into a spreadsheet. You get the change agents actually to score red, yellow, green. How are we assessed in each, as we get closer to go live? And the idea is that you want everything green before go live. Or if you have yellow or red, you understand the risks associated with that, and you can mitigate those risks, or you can accept those risks as you go into go live. So those, I think, are the four kind of key elements of OCM on every program. Okay, so we're continuing on here. So we've talked a lot about how to do it right, how to get OCM involved early on so that you do have high user adoption when you go live. But what happens to those programs that have already gone live? Maybe you didn't go through this approach, and organizations are suffering from what they consider to be not sufficient user adoption. So this last area is talking about what can you do after the fact to make sure that you improve user adoption. So if you're late in the game, like this situation indicates, really I'm not going to walk through every single element in this slide, but it all comes down to the fact that it has to be driven from the top down to increase user adoption. And what that means is getting the executive sponsors on board with the benefits of CRM, go through that vision again, make sure they all understand what is involved and why it's important. And then putting together a user adoption advisory committee or a board. And those people consist of the functional leaders for each of the functions impacted by CRM. And what they do as a group, they meet regularly, and weekly is typically the frequency, and they go through a root cause analysis as to why user adoption is not sufficient. There could be many, many different reasons. They create kind of the value proposition, and then they start to think about compliance management and the management philosophy for how you manage the effectiveness of a program. The management philosophy is a key element. So what that means is, how are you actually going to manage your sales organization to make sure that they're using the CRM platform as it was designed? And different organizations have different cultures. Some are less structured, some are very structured. And this is striking the right balance. You can kind of use the analogy of the carrot and the stick to say, what is the best way to provide the incentives necessary to make sure people use the platform the way it was intended? And it's a very important step to go through and have, first of all, executives understand and buy into that management philosophy, and then the functional leaders, and then, of course, your sales leadership as to how that's going to be managed. Once that's understood and determined, then you lay out your procedures and your processes that are going to drive that management philosophy. What are the actual steps you're going to do to make sure salespeople are actually using the system? And then it's enforcing that through training, through communications, rolling it out. I think the best approach is rolling it out in one geography or one area or one function, right? And getting an early success story and then leveraging that to roll it out to the rest of the organization. But this is really a top-down driven approach where you understand the root causes, you identify the management philosophy, and you drive that through communication and training. I'm going to hand it back over to you, John.
Great. So how do you prioritize? So, creating the roadmap, as David mentioned, involves, getting a team, a governance committee effort to assure you're going to get what the business desires to help continue receiving ROI out of your system that you expect. I mean, this is to try to be more proactive with your customer relationships and to get them information in front of them as opposed to have them search for it and find it. This has typically involved listening to their needs and ideas and prioritizing them with monthly or quarterly releases in your environment. So once with every roadmap, system expansion comes in, and then the conversation of data and data integrity and data integration. This is something that should be in constant evaluation of how your CRM data is connecting to or the needs of your data warehouse or your data management strategy. You should review everywhere from security features, for instance, who gets to change what, read versus write access. I mean, target profiles for your marketing, your sales, and your support teams so that the potential integrations will help enhance the user's experience. This is real critical and needs to be reviewed to ensure that your users are receiving accurate data and accurate profiles of their customers. If they cannot depend on your CRM system with accurate data, you'll quickly lose your user adoption. So this is just a sample release chart of CRM releases and functionality. This is always changing. As I mentioned, it's a continuous improvement process, and you're always adding new ideas based on the feedback from your executives as well as your end users. This is what allows you to easily prioritize your projects and then release them in the future, because we know that whatever went in to begin with is not going to be what you end up with, because as they become more literate and more knowledgeable of the data, the sources, the integrations, their vision and their requirements will change on the fly. So this can be done during weekly committee meetings, potentially made visible through your CRM application, especially now with the more robust tool set. A lot of data can be presented inside CRM, from the social, to social insights, some of your marketing information. It's very important that a key thing to modernize your data is to get rid of old projects, old data, or archive them, because you always want to show progress in your system. You don't want them to come in and kind of see the same old stuff that's been sitting there for months. So being real proactive and interactive with your users and your data and just getting things out of there that no longer matter, so you're constantly moving forward. So that's it. So hopefully we've been able to kind of identify and show the importance of organizational change management, how it's commonly overlooked, and that it is a methodology on its own that stands separate from project management and actually needs to be done in conjunction with project management. So I'll kind of turn it over to Jason and find out if we've got any other questions, or if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them.
All right, excellent. Thanks so much, John, David. Yeah, we want to hear your questions in the audience. What are you wondering about organizational change management? What experiences have you had that you'd like some feedback on? Tools, techniques that have worked for you or that you're looking for advice on. One question that came up involved, let's see here, OCM is new to me. What are some of the resources to research to get started here?
So great question. There is a lot of material available to get up to speed on what OCM is and what to do. There are lots of different methodologies, and of course MTech has a structured methodology. We've shared some of the components of that. If you want to start to do some research and look at somewhat of a kind of a generic approach that is kind of embedded in all OCM techniques, there's something called the ADKAR methodology, which is developed by an organization called PROCE. And ADKAR stands for Awareness, Desire, Knowledge, Action, and Reinforcement. Those are the 5 acronyms. And each of those is a step that talks about the various things you need to do in the life cycle of a program relative to OCM. So it's a good place to get started. And what it'll give you is a good awareness of kind of the things to consider regarding OCM.
All right, great. One thing I was curious about, I want to make a couple notes before we go on here. One, in case anyone did not see, we are recording today's session. We'll be making that available. We'll also be making the slides available when the recording is up, so those can be downloaded. And anyone who registered will get an alert on that. Also, there is a survey that we run that pops up right after you leave sessions, and we'd really appreciate your feedback, like 15 seconds, just to tell us how the experience was for you today. Our speakers always really appreciate that, as do we at MS Dynamics World, to let us know what you're thinking. And let me make a last call for questions here. We just had one more, and it's really about software selection, but also upgrades. And before I get to that, let me throw in one other question that came in, and that is, how do we avoid losing user advocacy when there's a long gap between requirements gathering and deployment?
So repeat that question one more time, Jason, sorry.
Yeah, how do we avoid losing user advocacy when there's a long gap between requirements gathering and deployment?
That's a great question. It all comes down to the business engagement governance approach that I talked about earlier. So if you set up this group of change agents, a change agent is a representative within each of the business functions that are impacted by this program. Requirements happen early in the program. As you go through design, you're coming up with future processes, you're looking at change impacts, you're getting the business involved in various aspects of the program, like data validation and testing, et cetera. The idea is never to lose the contact point between the business. So you're engaging through that change agent network, the business in all aspects of the program. So the way not to do it is gather all your requirements and then don't talk to the business until it's time to deploy, and then train them and hope that they understand everything, buy into it, and will use it. That has been proven not to work. What does work is, after requirements have been just understood and compiled, you keep them involved in all the aspects through that change agent network. And then the communication piece about cascading the relevant pieces of the program through the change agents is also something I didn't necessarily stress on, but those change agents play that role as well. So as various things are happening in the program, the change agents meet with their constituent groups within their business functions, and they are cascading communications about the program continuously.
All right, excellent. I think we are at the end of our question queue here. Great, so you put up your contact information. Here's how you can reach John and David for further questions. Well, John and David, thank you very much for taking the time and presenting to us today.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Yeah, thanks to everyone in the audience for your attention, for your great questions. Please do look for that survey as we close out today. And with that, we will end today's session. Have a great day.